This Week in Radio Tech, episode 174, is brought to you by the range of Telos multi-line talk show systems, from the low-cost Telos 1X6 through the IQ6, HX6, and NX6 and 12 systems, all the way to the multi-studio Telos VX system. There's a Telos talk show system perfect for your content creation. On the web at telos-systems.com.
And now, our feature presentation.
Twert.
How do radio broadcasters get a handle on social media interactions with listeners? We need new tools for connecting with listeners like never before.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Doc?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business,
or in a choice hotel in a distant land,
this is Kirk Harnack.
Dan McQuillin of Broadcast Bionics joins Chris Tobin, Chris Tarr, and me for an inspiring discussion beyond listeners.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, welcome in. It's time for This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. I'm so glad you're with us. I am so delighted about the show that we've got put together for you today. And so, first of all, our show is brought to you by the folks at Telos. They happen to be my employer, and I'm so happy about that. Telos Talk Show Systems, and it's a great way to bring other voices and content and people onto your radio station and help make more compelling programming. You should think about that. Did you cancel your Swap Shop show years ago? Bring it back. Did you cancel your Wednesday evening Ask the Doctor show? Bring it back. Put people on the radio and get them involved. That's my plug for, that's the programmer in me, okay? Hey, our show on the GFQ network also includes a few other co-hosts. So let me introduce them to you quickly. First of all, I'm Kirk Harnack, live in Nashville, Tennessee. I work for the folks at Telos, Omni, and Axia, Linear Acoustic, and 25/7. Now, the best-dressed engineer in radio, it's my friend and yours from Midtown Manhattan. It's Chris Tobin. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Kirk. Hello, everyone. Well, tonight I'll be from the studios of GFQ Network here in the Network Operations Center, the nerve center of everything we do. So I'm with the folks at CCS Musicam. We do IP codecs, we do audio, we do video. We're doing a lot of crazy things coming up this year, so it's fun stuff. And today I'm somewhat dressed down. It's very hot here in the city. Humid and hot, I guess is the best way to put it.
You're getting the weather that we had.
Yeah, we get this weather all the time, starting in July and through August.
Well,
so
that's true. Yeah. Hey, and our other co-host with us this evening, all the way from McQuillin, Wisconsin. We're always delighted when he can grace our show with his presence. It's the Ninjaneer, Chris Tarr. Hey, Chris.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am not the reason Kirk Harnack is excited about tonight's show, but I'm here. I am the Director of Operations and Engineering for 88.9 Radio Milwaukee, also contract engineer all over the place, contributing writer to Radio Guide magazine, and also co-founder of the site, The Virtual Engineer, at broadcastengineering.info.
We'll mention that again at the end of the show. Want to make sure people go there and get registered to participate in the forums. Broadcastengineering.info. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that service very, very much, and good luck on its continuing success. All right, our show. I'm so delighted to bring this fellow on the show. It is Dan McQuillin. Let's go ahead and bring him up and we'll let him talk about himself a bit. Dan you're the founder, Dan, of Broadcast Bionics. Very cool name, nice company out of the UK. Well, first of all, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very good. I'm not that far from Chris Tobin anyway. I'm just in North Haledon, New Jersey.
Yes, you're in your summer home.
Absolutely.
Yes,
it's not far at all.
It's not even slightly raining, so it's very unlike the UK. But this is where I spend some of the summer to escape the British weather, and it's pretty hot, and I think it's getting hotter over the weekend.
Yes, it is.
Well, Dan, as we go through the show, people are going to understand why I'm genuinely so excited to have you on the show. I saw a video that you did, and I've tweeted about it a few times and put it on Facebook, the show, a presentation you made called Beyond Listeners. And I'll put this in the show notes so our viewers and listeners can go have an easy link to go find that. And that's what really got me excited about your knowledge and your thoughts and comments and notions about where broadcasters need to go. Sometimes we touch on this subject here, but I don't feel that any of us, we all have opinions, but none of us are so expert at this. And I love the way that you summarize the issues and the getting listeners to participate and keeping radio alive and vibrant and meaning something, counting for something in this world of all these different multimedias. So Dan, I mentioned earlier, you're a founder of a company, Broadcast Bionics. Tell us about that.
So I started a company called Broadcast Bionics, kind of by accident. It was originally called the Broadcast Bionics Corporation, so because I had the letters BBC, because as a child I'd always said I would work for the BBC. Started by accident, just as a consultant, helping out. This is just at the point when radio started to use computers. So a system you had over here from Computer Concepts called DCS, the Digital Commercial System that you may have been familiar with at a bunch of stations in the US. A few radio stations put that in the UK, started having problems with it due to the way that we make odd-length commercials, due to the way that we do sort of non-satellite network splits with DTMF tones and so on. So a guy called Andy Gemmell-Smith, who was a friend of mine, he ran a mixing console company. He said, I know this kid who knows a bit about radio and a bit about computers. And I got a telephone call and started to work for one radio station, Radio Mercury, as a consultant, called the company Broadcast Bionics Corporation as a joke. Now the BBC is my biggest customer. We have this strange name of just Broadcast Bionics. But the whole concept of Bionics was supposed to be that both for the listener and for the presenter and the talent in the studio, you can't really tell where the human being and the talent ends and the computer begins. Because I think too often broadcast technology, if you're a presenter, you're fighting it. It's telling you have to do this next. You have to play that item next. You can't do that. So we wanted to work with technology that was just a natural creative extension of the talent in the studio. And from the listener end, we wanted to make technology which they couldn't really tell whether it was a human being doing it or a computer doing it. And as I kind of rant about a little bit in the talk Beyond Listeners, what's happened over the last 25 years is that the accountants in the radio station have seized on all this amazing technology, whether it's IP or it's automation or it's networking and so on, and they have said, what can we make this technology do? How can we make slightly worse radio, but that's much, much cheaper? And what I've tried to do in the last couple of years is go on this tour Beyond Listeners to various stations in various countries and say, hey, listen, what if it was the engineers empowering the creatives to make compelling content? What if we get back to this, I call it the creative conspiracy, where engineers in their offices are conspiring with the big egos and the big talent in the studio, and we ask the question, how could we make great radio? How could we make more compelling radio? How could we make the content better using technology, not just make it cheaper? I'm not criticizing the accountants. They've kept the radio stations on the air. They've kept all of us in business. But actually, they're the only people who've really been pushing the technology. And if we don't do this in radio, there are other platforms, there are other media out there which are continuing to be creative, which are really, really pushing this sort of content stuff. And if I'm brutally honest, if I was young again now, I probably wouldn't go into radio. I would be a YouTube sensation. I would, be making and streaming my own content, something like the GFQ that we're on now. And I want to make sure that, because I'm passionate about our media, I still believe that it works and it has real meaning. And I think if we can rekindle that, we have the right mix of skills between the talent in the studio, between the engineering skills we have, between the new media and the relationship that we have with our listeners is perfect if we seize this moment. If we don't, somebody will come out of an unexpected direction and we'll all be, doing something else that looks a bit like radio, that smells a bit like radio, but is really, really different in 5 or 10 years' time.
Wow. And that's a lot. And sounds like a lot of big goals, and I'm not sure where to start with trying to understand the how-to of what you're talking about. In your talk Beyond Listeners, what are some of the key points that you want programmers and engineers, station owners, to be aware of? You already mentioned that what the accountants do, and I gotta agree. How can we make it a little bit worse and yet cost a whole lot less? And this, while you were saying that, Dan, it reminded me of something that happened with music rotation lists over throughout the 80s and 90s. A lot of programmers found that every time they trimmed the music library to a smaller number of songs that were rotated more often, the numbers actually went up. The listening numbers actually went up. And some consultants will regurgitate this over and over. Now, I'm not sure why that happened, but then what we're end up with is a problem. We end up with a bunch of radio stations playing the same dozen songs over and over again. And how can the end result being everybody listens to the radio more? I don't know. But what points are you making in Beyond Listeners?
I mean, to your engineering audience, probably the central kind of first point is that we need to create what I call the social studio. So we need to understand that radio is produced from radio studios, and the TWERT, engineering audience will be very, very comfortable with radio studios. But one of the things I started looking at when I was looking at this space was radio studios really haven't changed for 50 years. The technology's changed. It's all now software. So, we used to have a source for audio, which would be, an LP or a single. Now that's all hard disk and it's played by a computer. We used to have a talk show system that was pieces of paper. Now that's a computer. We still have a microphone, and we used to have rotary pots. Now we have an IP console. But all we've really done is taken 50-year-old sort of metaphors and digitize them. We haven't actually said, right, now we have that technology. Now there's bandwidth between us and the listener, and the listener no longer has to be passive. Now the technology is all software, and it can intelligently talk to each other and understand what's going on. To me, the social studio is an intelligent place, which actually uses technology not just to empower the presenter, it's a platform, if you like, for engaging with the listener as well. So, we've gone from this position where basically the only thing you knew was, did all the telephone lines just light up because somebody swore or something went wrong? That was about the only element of feedback that you had. Now in real time, you know what your listeners are saying to one another. You know what they're saying to you. You know what the artists are saying. So we're trying to build what we call a social studio. So if you start from that premise as an engineer, what does a social studio look like? Instead of building a soundproof box with a microphone in, whose entire job is to keep the audio in and kind of the rest of the world out. If you re-engineer that space and say, a radio studio is a very specialized environment. So it was specially designed to create very, very high quality audio, no echo, no penetration from the outside world. It has lots of music sources that you can curate together. So it has, multiple audio sources, multiple microphones, multiple playback sources, multi-channel telephone calls coming in. But we haven't moved beyond that to say, okay, part of that curation task now is to curate the data which is hitting the studio. All of this extra information that we now know about what the listeners are saying, what they're tweeting, what they're texting, what the artists are saying. So we need to add to the curation space in the studio and that design to design our studios now to be social. What does that look like? And we don't really have a choice about this. Our listeners are changing, and so the Beyond Listeners tag, it was part of the description that said, we've lost the culture of listening. Your listeners listening to TWERT and watching us do this. This is probably not all they're going to be doing. They're going to be Googling other stuff at the same time. They're going to be checking Twitter. My kids, if they're sat on a sofa watching television, which is a visual medium, they'll also be watching YouTube clips on the laptop. They'll always have the phone next to them, looking at tweets and texts. So we do not have these passive listeners anymore. Yet in radio, all we sort of monitor is listening figures. As if people were sat passively just listening to the radio, as if radio was still part of the furniture. And the core premise is in a social studio, we take radio from being part of the furniture and we flip it to become part of the conversation, this broader experience that people are having, sharing with one another, communicating with one another, as well as engaging, with the studio.
So it sounds like just as we look at old photographs of a family gathered around an old radio, right? And they're all looking at the radio while they're listening to it. What we have done, what we do now, or what we've done up until now in radio will seem just as arcane as what we see people gathered around the radio listening to the Green Hornet or something. Isn't that right? In the future, won't we look at today as being part of the distant past?
Well, I don't want to frighten people, and I believe that actually fundamentally there's a lot which is good about radio. So one of the things I have to reassure people who'll be sat at home screaming at the TWERT, screen in front of them, you're wrong. Radio has tremendous value. Radio is something that people are passionate about. It's intimate. Don't ruin it. Don't make it into a weak, internet-based phenomenon. A lot of that is true, and we have to be very, very careful that we preserve what radio is good at. And one of the reasons that I think radio has a strong role to play in this is that we have 90 years of experience as curators. That's what we do. Radio is not just the music business. If it was, we would be dead. It's not just the news business. If it was, we would be dead. It's not just information and entertainment. We provide a brand of content that curates all of that together, adds personality, adds discovery, and in the social space, people are looking to have that same experience. So I'm actually looking to say, let's go back to what radio is good at, but it can now have these other elements. And the BBC have a great strategy that for Radio 1, who we're working on with this social studio platform, their program controller, a guy called Ben Cooper, introduced this strategy called Listen, Watch, Share. So every single radio idea that they think of, every single production element, everything that they build into their programming goes through these three filters. Number one is listen, and let's not forget that's what we do. We're mainly an audio medium, so focus on that. So I am not saying that social media is more important than your audio or your transmitter or anything else. And so it needs to take its place, and it's third place on the totem pole. Absolutely front and center is still going to be our audio content, and that's the primary reason for what we do. Second is watch. That's this concept of visualization. And one of the reasons that visualization is important is actually because radio itself isn't very shareable. So lots of people say that radio it was the original social media, which is unfortunately completely wrong. Radio is really quite antisocial. It's us as broadcasters shouting with a big voice, with big powerful transmitters, and thousands of people or millions of people just listening. It's slightly interactive, and there's a very, very narrow channel. I can talk to 11 million listeners on a national station, and 12 at once can phone me back. So yes, it's very slightly interactive, but it's incredibly asymmetrical, and it doesn't make use of what a social network really is, which is not me talking to you and you able to talk back. It's me talking to you, you talking to Chris talking to somebody else, me talking to my kids. It's that network, it's that sort of effect. Scattering out of everybody being able to talk and share information. Your radio set doesn't have a share button. It doesn't have a like button. It doesn't have a retweet button. So actually, one of the things that we do with visualization is that provides, because it's using new media rather than the old media, if Taylor Swift comes in the studio and you put a photograph of that on Instagram, people can share that. That becomes a very simple way of creating a social element that people can pass forward, and it then becomes attractional to bring people back to the radio station. So in second place is, for this multimedia, multi-platform world, radio is going to become increasingly visual. But actually, the Trojan horse there is that this visual content is often much more social. You have an interview on Z100 with Justin Bieber. You put that clip up on YouTube, and you will get millions of people who've never listened to Z100, watching that. So the watch part of it is multi-platform, but it's also social. And then the final part, and please put it in third place, not in first place. We're not trying to radically change the heart of radio, but is, how do you share, with the listeners, engaging with them, and making them part of the show. And that's what the bulk of the talk, and I guess what we'll talk about today, is what are some of the tips and technologies that you can use to actually really engage with listeners. And it's really old school stuff. Radio has always tried to the best of its ability to engage with its listeners. We've always taken white mail in the studio. We've always had 6 phone lines or 12 phone lines or 20 phone lines. Increasingly, people are using text messages, slightly less so email these days. So we've always had that element of interaction. But let's blow that wide open. Most of the listeners are now on a bi-directional link to the studio. So it's no longer just us shouting in one direction. Your listeners can talk to one another, and they can talk to you, and you can be right across what they're saying, in real time. And 30 years ago, if I'd gone into a creative radio presenter in Z100 or some major market station and said, I have a box in my bag that can tell you what your audience is thinking, tell you what news stories they're engaged about, tell you what artists they've started liking and following, tell you what joke they were sharing with their friends just before you went on air, they would have bitten your arm off to get a hold of that data, because they understand that radio, when it's at its best, has always been as interactive as possible. To me, The Breakfast Show lays the rails, the foundations for the show, and then a lot of the energy in a lot of different formats comes from, we call them listener interaction, but it's interaction with your audience, and I think we have in the next 10 years the ability to radically enhance that, and that will help us make great radio. But that's the aim, not to change radio. I want to make a better radio. Get it back to as good as it was 30 years ago, and actually with the tools and technologies we have now. Imagine if the greats and the pioneers of radio had in their hands the tools and technologies that we have today to connect with the audience and interact with them. I think we're just wasting a huge opportunity if we don't seize them and think of just loads of creative ways of making some amazing content.
Well, radio has been very slow to do that. If you look at, for example, television, USA does that with their programs. They have what they call their second screen, which is a computer, iPad, whatever, and they have companion apps and ways for viewers to make that a social experience when the TV show comes on. And it also helps them deal with time shifting and commercial skips and things like that, because all of a sudden everybody tunes in at the time the show is broadcast to participate in it together. And that's, as radio starts to try to find its legs in digital, that's something that's very important. As radio already is a locally shared experience. There's a lot of shared things going on, but people are sharing it, but in a linear fashion, in a non-interactive way. They're all experiencing it at the same time, but they're not talking to each other or experiencing it with each other in real time. So I do think that's, a great example is Twirt. Here's a show that a big part of what we do is, as we're, the show's going on, I'm over in the IRC channel talking with people who are watching the show live. It's become this shared experience. And I think you're absolutely right. It's unfortunately one of the things we've been very slow to kind of pick up on is how can we, take all of that and make it truly the shared experience we know it is. Unfortunately, we don't get that, as you said, we don't get that feedback in real time on how that sharing is happening.
So yeah, one of the things we're trying to do is to reduce the friction on. So as you said, it's a shared experience, but it's not very shareable. So, how many times have you sat in the car and listened to a radio link on your way into work and laughed at it and thought that was great? How many times have you listened to a talk show and got angry because somebody's made some point that you get passionate about? How many times have you listened to some, article or documentary and it's moved you and it's made you cry? You would, if there was a simple way of doing that, pass that on and share that and say, hey, this was great. I want people to listen. So one of the technologies that we're building into the new version of Phonebox called Phonebox 4, which connects into all of the VX and all the the telephony platforms. It's a piece of proper professional broadcast equipment. It sits in the studio and does your talk show management. But on top of that, it builds this social technology. So we're working with Audio Boo, who allow you to embed audio into tweets. So you can actually go back through the logging on your Phonebox screen and say, hey, in that last link, I want you to grab the audio for the last link, attach it to a tweet and send that out to to the fans. And then what will happen is once you get to work, you'll if you follow the radio station, there's the tweet of that funny link or that great compelling moment. You're going to forward that onto your friends. So we've taken radio and made it shareable. If you call into the studio or you send us a tweet and we read it on air, we have all the metadata, so we join that together. So we say, Kirk sent a message today for Z100. They read it out on the radio. They can send him a DM back that says, hey, Kirk, thanks for being on the show today. In case you missed it, here's a link. From that link, he can hear from 30 seconds before them reading his tweet out, because we have the information from the metadata of our computers as to exactly when it was read out. We have access to the logging. He hits their website, so they get a hit there, which makes them happy. He's happy because we remembered him and we sent him that link. And more importantly, because Kirk is such a vain individual, he will forward that on to all of his followers on Twitter. He'll forward that on to his friends and family on Facebook. So hundreds or potentially a couple of thousand people. That, to me, every piece of radio content, every link in radio is a viral moment. What you have to do is to get it into the hands of the right people. So Kirk having a phone call on a radio station or Kirk's tweet being read out, it's not viral to me. I don't care a monkeys about that. But put it into Kirk's hands and suddenly he shares that to a whole group of people. If those people are already P1 listeners, they're going to get competitive and say, hey, I listened to that radio station Kirk was on. I'm going to phone up or I'm going to tweet into the studio and get my tweet read out. If they're not already listeners of the station or P1 listeners, they're going to be, oh, well, Kirk's my friend. He listens to that station. So yeah, it's very important that we reduce what I call the friction between what happens in the studio space and what happens to make stuff shareable. So, I don't want, and one of the things I rant about in the Beyond Listeners talk is I don't want to give radio an even bigger mouth. Radio has taken social media and said, this is great. We like talking about ourselves. Let's just put pictures up. Let's just have us talking. The number one thing we need to do, and the talk's modified since the one from the Beyond Listeners on the YouTube clip, is I've actually taken that BBC strategy of listen, watch, and share, and reminded people that share needs to be third, but then broken up the share piece with another listen, watch, share, and say, okay, the first thing we need to do with our social media is we need to listen. So, the number one thing we need to be doing is not actually sharing and putting content out. We need to be listening to what's already out there, what our listeners are trying to tell us, and responding to that. But we do need to make sure that where possible, we actually reduce the friction, that you can share individual links, individual elements, really quickly share photos and moments that are happening in the studio. So we break this cycle of radio just being one-to-one and put stuff out that our listeners who really enjoy our content can then engage with it and share it and hopefully attract people back as an audience towards the station as well.
Dan, this easy sharing that listeners have, if I'm a listener, well, let me ask you this way. What kind of app, what kind of interface do you envision, or maybe exists now, or maybe early versions are existing now? What do you see the listener having in their hands? And as a frequent user of a phone, I use this Galaxy Note 2, an Android phone. I mean, it's so easy on this thing to follow links, to share something by Gmail or by Twitter or by Buffer. The sharing tools are probably not as cohesive as in an iPhone, but there's plenty of sharing tools in here. And once you get to use them, they're very easy. What do you envision for radio listeners to have available to them to have this interactive experience?
So, probably the closest thing I think that exists today is, it's from a US company, I think Broadcast Electronics sell it in the US, thing called Commotion, which we are now, we signed up at NAB this year to resell Commotion in the UK, but we're also partnering with the guys behind Commotion to actually, at NAB, when we started talking to people about social, they were like, oh yeah, Commotion is a social thing. Isn't that the same? And it's not. So the social studio and the stuff that I talk about is building a studio that factors social into the production end. What Commotion are doing is building what the player of the future, what might be on my phone, it might be in my car, because car radios. I'm driving a rental Ford around here. It's a computer. It's not recognizable as a radio anymore. It can do really clever stuff. And so, what will that player look like? So through Commotion, tweets and photos of the artists and a real-time chat room kind of conversation between listeners is all happening on the app. So you're not constantly, one thing radio stations get concerned about is that, well, I don't want to throw people to Twitter and throw people to Facebook. So it keeps it in-app. It means that, they're listening to your stream. They're all having that shared experience of the stream, but they also have the ability to communicate with one another and see other messages that appear. So, I think it will look something like, Commotion is only in its early days. They just released a new version, and we are really in the only days of building what these social studio tools look like. But the exciting thing is when I'll go out and talk to stations, and really the price of admission is to say, get the producer and presenter of the breakfast program, get the program controller, then get somebody from IT and streaming and the broadcast engineer, and let's have a meeting where we talk about what the social studio might look like, what this player might look like. Because one of the reasons this doesn't happen is you have to get all of those people in one room at one time, because this isn't a piece of traditional broadcast equipment. So the broadcast engineer is not going to say, I need to buy myself a social studio. I need to take phone box and get the new social media version. His job is to build soundproof boxes with microphones in. The producers and the presenters don't really know what's possible. The IT and the streaming and the online guys are scared of the studio. They don't understand the culture. They don't understand that when they can go in, the technology and so on. So we have these amazing meetings where, and if there's anything people take away from this, it's first of all just imagine what a social studio might look like, and make up your own technology. But secondly, set up one of these meetings and get all those people in one room. And it's an amazingly powerful experience, because the first thing you have to do is to introduce the people to each other, because they will never have met one another. Because, Kirk and I were talking that, it used to be the radio station engineers, the chief engineer's office was immediately adjacent to the main on-air studio. That's how we used to build radio stations, because stuff went wrong all the time. And you had to have the oscilloscopes and the soldering irons and all the kit to kind of mend it. Now we have the situation where the engineers are in an air-conditioned office on the other end of the country. They only visit radio stations on a cycle once every 6 weeks. So they're not actually across what the talent want. In fact, they're not they don't consider their job to be empowering the talent and being part of the process. There's almost this tension where the engineers think the talent are just a pain because they break stuff, and the talent don't like the engineers because the engineers, are so busy they don't really have time for them, and basically they're terrified they're going to get automated out of their job, and so there's this. It's gone from this incredible, beautiful energy where working really closely together, whether it was with the initial audio processing or cart machines or any semblance of technology, really Heath Robinson contraptions that were terrible, technical underpinnings, but it was just about possible with early DSP or with tape or with other technology to make this great and amazing content. And now we've suddenly got all this incredible digital technology. In a way, we've got this huge separation where, because we now in engineering speak a different language, and we don't really have, we're not really set up both either physically or time-wise to spend time really understanding what's happening in the studio. It's really just, can you keep the lights on? Can you keep the station on the air? How cheaply can you do it? How generically can you produce it? And there's nothing magic in what I'm saying, but it is just a little different way of setting up that team of people. And if you create one of those meetings, genuinely, it's a really kind of exciting moment.
So, okay, we got an idea of what the consumer's end of things look like. What does this look like in the studio? It sounds like, from what you're saying, that there could be a whole lot of information to digest for the few people who are still left in the studio. Can some of this happen automatically? Is it digested for them in a format on a screen that they can interact with and deal with and push out or share the things that they need to quickly? What does this look like?
So we've built this really cool platform called Phonebox 4, and the only criticism we've had when we've shown it at trade shows and stuff is, well, you can't call it Phonebox because it's not all about phones anymore. But that's a good brand that we have. We're in 40 different countries with it, and so it's called Phonebox 4. But we've completely redesigned the user interface to give us the geography, the real estate in the screen, to really nicely manage social media. And to completely modernize the interface. This is something that imagine you've got a 23-inch widescreen touchscreen in your studio, which is a giant iPad, a giant iPhone. It's all swipeable, it's all touch scrollable, and on that you have this surface which understands, first of all, we understand the context of what's happening. So this is not just TweetDeck or Hootsuite. We know you're making radio. So we're talking to the Axia console and we know which networks you're on air to, which faders are open, we know what songs you're playing. So it's a context-aware, collaborative piece of equipment. So you can have producers and presenters in various places sharing information, passing information, screening information for one another. So it's context-aware and collaborative for a team of people working the way that radio works. But it is, as you said, and I think this is where we're just getting to broadcast technology really getting exciting, is it's smart. So, but let me give you an example. I'm sat in a BBC Radio 1, and I open the fader and I start playing a song by Ed Sheeran. So what Phonebox 4 does is it knows that now live on air I've just started playing Ed Sheeran. It's connected to the Music Brains database, which is embedded inside it. So it knows the official Facebook page and Twitter feed for Ed Sheeran. So it goes out and instantly pulls back what Ed Sheeran is tweeting right now. It also knows which of your listeners like and follow Ed Sheeran and which ones are talking about him. And the smart cue will bubble that information to the top. So as you start playing the song, you'll say, oh, Ed Sheeran just announced a new tour date. So it's like having a whole team of researchers and people at your fingertips, but the system just does it by watching what the studio's already doing. You didn't do anything that you weren't going to do anyway. You just opened the fader, you played the song. We can also say you're playing a song by Lady Gaga next. Here's the information about news event happens, fire, flood, tornado. We pull the information geographically from close to that. So it's tools and technologies which all exist now, but you would need a team of people. You would need a suite of different web products and things to pull it all together. And what we've built is what we consider to be a professional piece of broadcast equipment. You would not go into a radio studio and say, hi, I'm doing a music show. I bought my turntable and my CD in from home. But that's what we do with social media. People very often will just use their iPhone in the studio because it's better than the nasty web-based screen that they get given in the studio. I wouldn't do a talk show on a major format station and bring my iPhone in and hold it up to the microphone to get a caller on air. But that's basically what we're doing with social media. Because there isn't a professional piece of broadcast equipment whose job it is to curate these thousands of messages in real time as they come in. So yeah, we actually make the job worse before we make it better, in that we pull in not just what your listeners are saying to you, but we automatically go out and find what your guests are talking about from their official feeds, what the music is that you're playing. We look at everybody who messages the station. We start to follow them and to watch what they're saying to each other. So again, before you do a talk show, you can actually know what your audience is talking to each other about. So if this concept of a vertical conversation, which is a listener talking to the radio station, it's a vertical relationship. And then horizontal relationships is that when those listeners then talk to other people, not when they're talking to you, but it's publicly available information when they post other stuff, what is the voice of your listener saying? And it's remarkable. We have a screen in Phonebox where you can see the hashtags that people use when they're talking to you, and then underneath that you can see it's a top 10. So it shows new entry, non-mover, gone up, gone down for simple radio folk. And underneath you see another top 10, which is what the listeners are saying to one another. Those two, until people start using the system, are always very, very different. But when you start to merge the two together, then instead of imposing a conversation on the listener, you join a conversation which is already happening. You engage with those hashtags, and again, then you become part of that conversation rather than just saying, "Hey, today we're going to talk about X, Y, or Z." You actually can know what news stories or what topics are really hot for the listeners, and engage with it.
Something that crossed my mind that I'm curious about is so many radio stations have a live morning show, breakfast show, as you call it, out there, and you might have an automated midday, or maybe you have a request lunch hour. So you've got periods of time when there are people in the studio, and likely periods of time when there's no one in the studio. What's it like when the social interaction starts up again and then falls off, and starts up and falls off? And then as a follow-up to that, are there automated tools to make it appear that listeners are being interacted with, or does that come off as being completely fake when we try to implement that kind of technology?
Yes. I mean, first of all, one benefit you have with social media and sharing a show is that a show can now live for much longer than the 4 hours that it's on in the morning. So you can have a 2-hour or 4-hour show. And yet, while that show is not actually still live, it echoes in the Twitter sphere. People are still talking about it. People are still engaging with it. So even when you're not live, people will actually be engaging with with content that was live, and people can be talking to one another about content that's coming out from an automated program. You should be careful, about faking it. Authenticity is very important in radio, and it's really pretty important in social media as well. But there's certainly nothing to stop you scheduling tweets to start to promote and start the conversation. So imagine you've got a 2-hour, 3-hour show in the morning. That may echo anyway for another hour or two afterwards, and then we can analyze your audience and say, as the conversation starts to tail off, then you start to provoke question and comment on a topic that you're going to then cover maybe in the evening or maybe on tomorrow's program, and you start a new conversation going. So it can certainly create a 24-hour sort of life cycle. One of the things we do is again, by understanding networking in radio, is we can. A lot of what happens in the UK is you'll have 20 separate breakfast shows in the morning who all have their own Facebook page for the local area that they're from. In the afternoon, the programming is live, but it's all coming from somewhere else. But no one's going to react to those Facebook pages because there's nobody there. So again, we have this aggregation that can automatically follow the network. So at breakfast, those 20 Facebook pages and 20 separate Twitter feeds will all be at the individual local sites. Immediately the local sites end, they will still get a reaction from the network center, because the tweets and the Twitter and Facebook pages will be aggregated as part of the show feed, and the network show knows that it's networked to those stations, and they can still answer in brand. Because one of the things we did quite well about 20 years ago was this, what we call networked programming in the UK, and you have it here, syndicated programming, whatever. The problem is that mostly we did it so well the listeners didn't notice. We automatically insert localized commercials, we insert localized jingles, we give localized phone numbers. As soon as you have social media, it's utterly transparent. It's obvious that the fakery is laid bare, because there's 50 different Facebook pages and half of them are never answered, and they're all sort of wrong. So again, what we've said is you need a proper piece of broadcast equipment to deal with that, because if you just try and do it with one guy using TweetDeck, you're going to make completely transparent this sort of network radio problem.
Wow, this is a lot to digest. Hey, Chris Tobin, you're there. I know you're sucking all this in, and you're already you have been involved with making things like this happen. Where do you see the conversation and the technology and this whole thing going, Chris?
Dan is absolutely right. I will agree with him on many things. Actually, I had the opportunity several years ago to work with a programmer and a couple of presenters who we were doing exactly what you're describing, that the phone box, I believe, is doing all in one chassis. We did the same thing with tweets and Facebook, and switching cameras and trying to engage the audience. I guess to take the step beyond listening, beyond the listeners. That is the YouTube video you have. And I agree with you. Radio is definitely a medium that has still more to go. I've been saying that for a long time on this show, and I've actually said it publicly in many places when I speak before college broadcast groups and students trying to understand more. And I think I'm discovering more and more that people are watching and looking at this industry and go, I'm not interested to get into it because of the lack of engagement or the management of the bandwidth that we're not doing properly. But I would agree with you. And, I'd say Z100, as you pointed out, they do a lot of stuff, I know, behind the scenes and I will say in front of the microphone to engage the audience. And I've seen the results. And it's really good. And some other radio stations are starting to catch up. But we have a long ways to go. The mindset. Because I work... I was just going to say, as you pointed out earlier in your conversation, you mentioned the engineers and programmers and presenters working together to bring the technology, to bring things forward in order to be more, I'll just say, more engaging element of the radio industry. When I was working at radio stations back in 1990s, I actually worked with a programmer. This is way before it became vogue. It was actually 89, 90. And he would come to us in engineering and go, look, I need to find a better way to reach the audience and engage and do stuff. And we were doing things before, the social media craze began. And it was just amazing watching how we were able to engage audience, go to an outside broadcast. People would show up out of nowhere who listened to the radio station infrequently, and then when they saw what we were doing and all of a sudden became P1 listeners, it was just out of control. We became a force to reckon with, and it was just amazing. And then things sort of died down in the industry. Now it looks like they're turning around. So everything you're talking about and everything you've said so far, absolutely true. It's just a question of finding the right people to take that chance, or as the saying goes, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. So it's sort of like, you laugh, but it's true.
It's true.
I have worked with several executives, both from the programming, accounting, engineering, marketing departments in a former job, and that was the line that would come out in a meeting. If we call it brainstorming, brainstorming meetings are not supposed to pass judgment, but these guys did. And it was classic. As soon as you had a great idea, something that made total sense, but would be a little unorthodox, or would be a little bit of a maverick of a engineering approach, that was the line that would come out. You know what? No one ever got fired for buying IBM, so I don't know if we want to do this.
Well, there's really there are two types of programmers when it comes to this kind of stuff. You've got, and I've worked with both. You've got one type who, they're fantastic to work with. They're always looking for something new. They're always looking for new ways to engage listeners. They're always looking for unconventional ways to get things done. And then you've got the others who say, you know what, we're a radio station. Let's just do radio. Why are we worrying and distracting ourselves on all this other stuff? Because we're a radio station. We do radio. That's what we're supposed to do. And anything that's not related to just being, having something on the radio is just a distraction. So, I've worked with both, and I got to be honest, the ones who are on the other side of that equation, how can we do new and exciting things and engage our listeners in new ways, are typically the ones that do exceptionally well. But I think that, there's still this mindset in radio especially that, first of all, we don't want to see, a lot of people are afraid that they're going to look like they're caving into Pandora and competing and acknowledging that, number one. And I think number two is that you still have a core group of people who, look at radio and go, this is radio, this is what we're supposed to do. Anything else is kind of a distraction from that. And that's why, even, 2 years ago, we'd have these conversations on Tort about things like radio apps that aggregated all different radio stations in one app. And we kept going, well, this is something we need to do. Yet just about every executive out there is going, well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to participate in that. And, the tide's starting to turn. So it's happening really, really slowly as, fortunately we start getting some, some fresh blood into the industry here that have a little more forward thinking when it comes to looking at how, radio and their audience can talk to each other and how to make things as frictionless as possible to do that.
Yeah, and I think the distraction argument is actually a good one, and that's why we always want to start with the concept that we're making radio. And when it comes to visualization and other things, you have to be careful. If we make a piece of radio which annoys or frustrates a listener in a car because he can't see the photograph people are talking about, then actually you could end up annoying a very large listener base. So it does have to be done carefully. And with sensitivity, we are trying to make great radio. That's the job of a social studio, is to make great and compelling radio. That's a great listening experience. But the distraction argument is quite easily countered by saying, I'm sorry, guys, we really don't have a choice. The audience is ahead of us on this. The audience is already trying to engage with us. You've probably got producers and presenters sat in the studio with their iPhone, bypassing the radio station equipment and directly having a conversation with the listeners. If that guy leaves your radio station and goes to another radio station, he's going to take those relationships with him. Yeah. So we're in a situation where the listeners are way ahead of the radio stations, and scarily as broadcast engineers, in some ways that the talent in the studio is making it up as they go along, throwing it to the intern to kind of manage, and we need to say, actually, we as a radio industry are good at this. We make equipment that does this. We can understand this. We're all a little bit too old to be credible in this space. My teenage children think it's hilarious that I'm this social media expert, because I know nothing about it. But what I know about is building broadcast technology, is building user experiences which make sense in that curation space, and that's something which the 17-year-old intern actually isn't that good at doing. So just saying, hey, get the intern to do this because they know social media and they're young does not work, because they're not experienced at building tools and technology. They're very, very fluent at using the tools that are there and understanding how to engage. But it really needs some broadcast professionals to step in and figure out how we can apply this to make that compelling content. I was in South Africa last week at a conference there, the Joburg Radio Days. And the incredibly moving thing about being there was their radio really still matters. So we're talking about political content and conversations, which is part of a changing society and a modern young democracy. And I was at this radio conference, and the opening quote from the dean of the university was, the truly marginalized are those who don't have the opportunity to engage with the rest of society. And to them, radio, was at this brand new talk station the day before, Power FM. Amazing facilities, radio that we would recognize today, these 23-inch touchscreens, these Axia consoles, all the same equipment we have in the US and the UK. But the radio they were making was completely different. The radio they were making was 20 years out of date by our standards, and God bless them, may they never change it. Don't go the way that we've gone. It was compelling and it was original. It was something that people were passionate about listening to and was really making a difference in society. I was talking to somebody from a radio station in Malawi where 93% of their listeners, 96% of their listeners are completely illiterate. The radio is the only voice they will ever hear to read them the news and to bring them what's happening in the outside world. Or a guy called Zenze in Zimbabwe who gets arrested for distributing radios. I thought, holy cow, when did I last come across somebody who produces some radio that they would be willing to be arrested for? Or when did you last hear 10 great songs in a row that you would be willing to be arrested just to listen to? We have this amazing medium which is capable of communicating in an incredible way. And I want to use these social tools to engage with our audiences, to make them as passionate about our content, to make them as engaged with what we're doing. Yes, it involves some new business models. Yes, it involves some new understanding. But radio, has this big voice. It shouts. Radio has used social media as I describe it, as a flagpole. So the competition is how high can we make our flagpole? How big can we make our flag? What social media says is, no, what you want to build is a totem pole. What you want to build is a meeting place. I love that the official description of a totem pole is a kinship pole. It's a community center. It says, we share this identity. We understand the symbols on this pole because this is what we share in common. That's what a radio brand is. It's about saying, yes, I like your comment and opinion. I align myself with your music choice or your political bias or whatever else it is. And we produce this group of people who curate themselves around this curated brand of experience. And if we add the social stuff into that, we can build something that is really compelling and really powerful and speaks to people. And then what you can do with social is you can engage, with this narrow viral channel, you can actually start to drop different content in that will then target and find specific audiences. So one of the radio stations that I visited in South Africa, Highveld, had done a special pop-up radio station for Justin Bieber concerts. They are not a 13-year-old girl, teeny poppers kind of radio station. So they made a whole separate pop-up radio station just for that concert, built a whole social experience around that, actually made money because the whole thing was sponsored and had promotion, alongside it. And they have a great concept of they have the guy Ravi who runs it was saying they have two business models. So they have business A, which produces radio content and has traditional advertising, and then they have business B, and you have to create a separate business. The economics and the way that you drive all of this stuff, other people, Absolute Radio, who do this brilliantly in the UK, they have the radio labs. And again, another thing I would encourage people to do is start this business B or start a radio labs that lets you experiment in a small way. This is a lottery ticket for your radio station. Don't spend all of your budget on this, but take some risks. And I encourage people to do that actually about now, this time of the evening, 8, 9 p.m. This is the digital bounce. If you look at your listening figures, you have the traditional drive time in the morning when people are in their cars, and then you have people listening at work, and then you have another bump in the evening. You now have another bump around 8, 9, 10 p.m., which is people sat on their laptops, and they're also listening to the radio in the background. That is when radio should be producing this really new content. Go experiment. Go hire. Radio One's hired some people off YouTube. So go and find some talent on YouTube, hire them and put them in a radio studio. Listen to how they react. What do they like? What do they do? Things about our culture that will shock them. Learn from them. So, start hiring people not just from local radio stations, but go on YouTube and find talent. Train them up in the broadcast, radio studio. They'll be flattered that you think of them as a broadcaster, but they are. That's where the talent is. Bring them in and then start experimenting with this new creative interactive stuff in that evening spot, 8 p.m. till 11 p.m. when people are sat at their laptops, when they're at home. And I think we can come up with some really exciting content in those spaces. But you have to plan it differently as a business. You have to think of it differently creatively. And ultimately, you have to be willing to take some risks. And yes, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. But you know what? When Blockbuster Video went bust in the UK, a lot of people got fired because they didn't see Netflix coming. And, so you can be too safe in any industry where you're facing competition. And I talk about the creative conspiracy. That conspiracy is happening at Pandora. It's happening at iTunes Radio. They don't have the quality of Totem Pole that we have, brands that people trust. They don't have the pedigree that we have of this curation experience. But they have the talent and they have the hunger and the appetite. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they've got engineers working hand in glove with business people, and with creative people to produce some really nice experiences. But we can do better than that because we have big talent in the studio. We have this, curation brand and this experience. We just got to make sure we make use of it. There's a great book that I promote to people with my business hat on. It's by a guy called Clayton Christensen, and he talks about the innovator's dilemma. That basically, when one business gets gazumped by another one, they're always looking up and saying, what big technology is going to come and crush us? That's never what happens. What happens in the book, he talks about steam shovels. And you're probably not familiar with steam shovels, but steam shovels were the only way of digging a hole in the ground. And when JCBs were invented and they came along, they were like, well, what is this? It's ridiculous. It's too small. It can't lift enough weight. But that was the technology that ultimately put those people out of business. And he talks about the hard disk market, how every time there was a complete reinvention of the hard disk market, the existing number one brand got decimated and a new brand would come along because they failed to see the competition coming from a space that when they first looked at it, they were like, well, there's no money in that and it's not really very big or very powerful, so we'll just ignore that. And radio really has to look in that direction and say, okay, there is not huge money in this now, but this is where the audience are going. This is where the technology is going. And most importantly, this is where the platforms are going. One thing radio needs to understand is that there are these powerful platforms in people's lives. So in the living room, it's, do you have an Xbox? Do you have an Apple TV? Or do you have a PlayStation? There is a battle for the platform that sits in your living room. We're not really playing part of that as radio, but we really need to understand what's happening in that space. When people say that television didn't kill radio, yes, it did in the living room. And when people say, well, iPods didn't kill radio, well, they did in people's pockets. So all we have left really is the car. And guess what's coming in the car? So there's now a third platform battleground. Traditionally, there's been a platform for who owns the living room. Then there's who owns your pocket. And finally, there's this platform of who owns the car. And the platform battle we will fight in the car is not against other radio stations. It's against dark forces. It's against forces that want to know the GPS location of the car so they can target advertising to you, people who want to bring you traffic information. It's big budget stuff from Google and Apple that we can't compete with because they have billions of dollars to throw at this because they want to be in the space that we've traditionally owned. And we can't compete with them financially, but we need to make sure that our content is part of that conversation. It's part of what happens in the car. We cannot ignore it because that safe space in the car is a platform which within the next 5 years is going to be radically transformed. When you've got 100 meg coming into your car and you've got, we're working with Harman Can't say too much about it because we've got NDAs, but on what the radio experience will look like in car. At the recent iOS 7 announcement, one thing that some people picked up on was iTunes Radio. That's great, and there's a huge argument in the UK: is that really radio or not radio? Doesn't really matter. That wasn't the announcement. The announcement was iOS coming to the dashboard. So once iTunes have iTunes Radio and iOS is in your dashboard, that's a game changer for us and for our industry. And we really need to make sure that our curation job is being done as well as possible, so that we deserve to belong and have our spot on the dial. And that secondly, we're engaging with this sort of technology, this sort of content, and we're engaging with these platform providers. Are you on digital television? Because that's the only way of getting into somebody's living room. Are you streaming video and audio? Because that's the way people are going to be listening to radio and consuming it on their mobile phone. And how are you going to engage with the platforms to make sure that when you get your brand new Ford and you can talk to it and it's got this amazing screen, what role will radio play when that's connected and you can have your Stitcher or your iTunes radio coming out? I am passionate about this industry. We will do well. We have a voice that can really, really thrive. And people like Google are spending billions trying to build curation businesses that I think we've done really, really well for the best part of 100 years. Let's not kind of throw it away. Let's actually make great radio for the next 100 years. It just might look a little bit different around the edges, but you know what? It will be better. It will be more exciting. It will be just as spontaneous. It won't be as big and heavy as television. Television has some advantages. Television is episodic, and it's series based. So every so often, the show goes off the air and the production team, has a break. My other radical idea is, once every 2 years, take your morning show off air and give them a break and go reinvent the show. Most radio stations haven't changed the design of the studio for 50 years, other than it's all now software. And if we're honest, most radio shows haven't really changed their format or their style very much, again, for 20 years. The only time we change the format is when a presenter leaves or gets fired, and then a new team come along. Let's reinvent radio a little bit more frequently than that, to try new stuff, even in the key parts of the day. But actually really experiment by building a social studio that empowers those people, and then experimenting maybe in that digital bounce slot in the evening with some really cool interactive stuff, which may then actually trickle down to the rest of the day. I don't know, have you guys talked on Twitter about this? I think it's 102.3 now in Edmonton. Have you come across that case study?
No.
It's an amazing radio station. I'm probably going to get some of the facts wrong, but it was about 3 or 4 years ago. They set up a music station, mostly a mixture of music and talk station in Edmonton, now 102.3, I think it is. And they were the 18th radio station in the market. And their goal, somewhat conservatively, was to become number 5 in the market. They made no music positioning statement whatsoever. So they didn't really target themselves as a demographic. What they did is they replied to every SMS. They replied and engaged with every single piece of content that came into the studio. Presently, I think it's about 5,000 messages a day. They were number 5 in their radio market within 60 days. They were number 1 in their market within 90 days. No music position statement, nothing that a traditional radio station would do. All they did is they engaged with their audience. They replied to every piece of content. They used all that interaction on air. They created this social conversation. They were number 1 in a competitive market of 18 radio stations. Not only that, but they now take 20% of the revenue of the advertising revenue in their market. And their only premise is that they will reply to every email. They will engage with every conversation. They will reply to every SMS. I got no idea what their SMS outgoing charges are, but that was it. This genuinely works. We don't have a choice because it's where the audience are going, but the people who've done it really find that that they have an incredible reaction.
Actually, I have heard of this station. This was the first Commotion app I installed. I'd forgotten about it, but I saw as soon as I saw their logo, I thought, I've seen that on my phone. So they have their own Commotion app. It's customized for them, and you can find it. I just found it in the Google Play Store. That's amazing, though. They went from number 18 to where was it? Number 5?
They went from 0. So they were a startup radio station in a market with 18 stations. So they went from absolutely nowhere on the dial, brand new startup. I don't know what they spent on other advertising and marketing, but their number 1 premise was that they were slowly going to get to be number 5. They had no strong music premise. They had but they thought they had this interesting voice. And I'm really seeing this mix of speech content and music content working really well. A few of the stations in South Africa were doing it. And the interesting thing about now is that it appeals to an interesting demographic of both male and female. So the female audience really likes the fact that it has this sort of friendly music mix, and they like the chatter that goes on, but they really like the music mix. Male listeners see it actually as a modern talk format. So they see the music as being the background and the talk and the engagement as being foreground. So it has this incredible demographic mix. One of my favorite remarks actually was from Power FM at the talk in Johannesburg. They talked about somebody said, what's the demographic for your station? They said, we don't have a demographic, it's a psychographic. People who think a certain, people of a certain intellect, people who think a certain way, people, it doesn't matter how old they are. And now that probably makes it painful for the advertising. But, you want to actually not just say we're targeting this music premise, we're targeting this demographic. Go target the audience's psychographic. And if you do that socially, you'll be speaking both to men and women. You'll be talking to some of the innate human, emotions. And I know it's controversial, but it bugs me that I think very often radio stations and groups make radio for their shareholders. That's the wrong way around. It might not be safe to say this in a commercial industry, but we need to make radio for our listeners. And when the listeners love us and when they come in their droves, that is what will make the shareholders happy. If we make radio for the advertisers and we make it for the shareholders, and too many people do this, yes, it's safe and you can make the nobody gets fired for buying IBM, but actually a lot of industries are getting replaced, whether it's the newspaper industry, the music industry, the DVD rental industry, because they haven't embraced all of the possibilities of technology. And that's where I think we'll make a mistake. If we make safe, cheap radio that keeps our shareholders happy alone, and we ignore the listeners, ignore the new culture of not listening, of wanting to be engaged, of all the other media choices and platforms the listener now has, and we go, but this is what we've always done. Yeah, I tell you what, this is all the stuff I'm talking about is what we've always done. And in fact, some of it we haven't done very well for a while, goes right back to the roots of radio, but we're doing it in a more modern way. The Now example and lots of other examples prove that the audience will really react, and that will sure as hell make your shareholders and your advertisers very happy indeed.
Wow. This is almost too. My head's about to explode. And by the way, I need to make a mention of our sponsor, and I want to hear from Chris Tarr, because the station Chris is working with now, they're doing a lot of outside activities, a lot of remotes and music events, and they're very involved. And it seems like it takes a creative bunch of people like the ones that Chris works with to move in this direction that you're talking about, Dan. But I want to remind everybody you're listening or watching to This Week in Radio Tech. It's episode number 174. Our guest is Dan McQuillin. I'm Kirk Harnack here along with Chris Tarr and Chris Tobin. And we're talking about where radio is going socially and how to keep listeners and get them interacted. And Dan and his company, Broadcast Bionics, I think just have some fantastic ideas for putting some ideas that we need to put to use, and some technologies to put those ideas to use. We're going to include a number of links in our show notes for this show, so you won't be left out if you missed any of these things. Right now, though, I want to tell you about our sponsor, and that is my employer, the folks at Telos. And I'm going to go bring up my cheat notes here. Part of getting listeners involved is getting them on the air. And this can work in so many formats, whether you're a music format to bring on people who are calling in to make requests, or talk shows, or interactive shows. Remember in the days we used to have a swap shop or a Tradio show, or we used to have, seems campy now, but we used to have the hospital report and the new birth report from the hospital, and I worked at a station, we had a funeral home report, but we had people calling in and being on the radio, people who were your neighbors or people who you saw at the grocery store or downtown or at the parade or something. Well, involving listeners, one way to do that is to put them on the air. And to do that, you're going to need a talk show system, or at least a telephone hybrid. And certainly the folks at Telos know how to do that and make it sound really, really good. I want to mention to you that at Telos, you can go to the website, telos-systems.com. And some of the multi-line phone systems that are offered, anything from the 1X6, which is our kind of entry-level phone system, up to, there's the NX6 and NX12, which is on the screen right now. This handles either 6 phone lines or 12 phone lines. It includes 4 hybrids, so you can put 4 callers on the air at the same time with the NX6 and NX12 system. If you're hooked up to a LiveWire audio console, you get use of all 4 hybrids individually on individual faders, if you like. There's also the HX6, which I have one of those behind me right here, an HX6 phone system. It uses POTS phone lines and uses the gorgeous VSET 6 to control it. There's also the IQ6, specially made to work with Axia consoles at a very low price that you can get right into a 6-line talk show for a couple $1,000s if you plug it into your Axia console. And then there's the king daddy of them all, the VX phone system. This is the one that takes SIP, Session Initiation Protocol, or voice over IP phone lines coming in over Ethernet or IP. And this phone system is so cool because it has the ability to take phone calls that are encoded as G.722. And that means you can get 7 kilohertz of audio quality from a telephone like this. You can get a free or a low-cost app to do G722 phone calls using your data plan with the Telos VX system. There are stations doing this right now, putting their reporters and their program directors, they're going out and doing quick remotes on the air with a cell phone into their regular on-air phone system because they're using a Telos VX phone system. And I got to tell you, we'll foreshadow a little bit. In some parts of the world, I think Europe may have beaten us to it, but in the U.S., one carrier is doing HD voice. They're doing, it's G.722.2. It's a version of G722. And this also gives you great audio quality. I've got it in this phone. It's a T-Mobile phone. And pretty soon maybe it's a little strong, you'll be able to take these phone calls on Telos VX phone systems. Really cool stuff. It's coming. It's and some of it's here now. You can have great audio quality on the air. And hey, some of the big networks across the U.S. are using the Telos VX. Not sure I can mention all of them, but there are some big networks that you might watch on TV to get your news from that are using the Telos VX to put callers and reporters on the air. So check it out at telos-systems.com. And I want to give Dan, if you could add to what I said here for 30 seconds. With most of our phone systems, we include for free a light version of a program called X-Screen. Dan, what is X-Screen? What does that help folks do?
So, yeah, for a long time, we've been building cool screening platforms, started with the BBC in the UK, who we've just put 23 VXs in for. So they're very happy. And I'd have to say, with my social hat on, by the way, the telephone call is still the gold standard for, if you can put a live caller's voice live on air, the emotive content of that, the connectivity of that is way bigger than this social stuff we're talking about. What we're noticing, though, is the number of people calling stations is beginning to drop off as people use other means to engage. So you need a mix of both. But certainly, we're the Telos Axia Omnia guys in the UK, and we sell a lot of VXs. And the good news for your customers is, Phonebox VX is now Phonebox 4. So it has the social studio stuff built in. If you buy the VX platform, you can have all the social media stuff we've been talking that plugs right in alongside that. But that's the big brother, if you like. That's a system. And if you don't need all those features, we made a cut down version that still has a lot of the powerful features of audio recording and being able to label up calls and do all that sort of stuff in a basic package we call X-Screen. And we give that away. So there's a free version in the box with every VX and NX and IQ6 and HX6 and so on that goes out from Kirk and the guys over at Telos. And that's absolutely free. It's not a joke. It's not something which is time limited. It's not something which is utterly useless. For 60-70% of stations who buy a product, it's probably all they'll ever need. We have there's a small upgrade you can do if you need certain features that you add into the product. Or if you're a slightly bigger network or a bigger group, then there's the full Phonebox VX that provides all the social media, social studio stuff we were talking about. But that was something we wanted to do for the industry to, we noticed that were people, it didn't make sense for them to buy the big products, either commercially, it was going to cost them too much money, or it was too complex. So we wanted something where they could put the installation CD in, it would just look at your VX box, learn the configuration, or look at your IQ6, learn the configuration, and just start itself going. So simple to install, pretty simple to use, but it hides quite a lot of complexity and sophistication that you have some pretty good tools there for making what is still the gold standard of interactive radio. If you can get a listener's voice live on air, the BBC get very excited at people they think are going to cry. Special icons for that in their call screening systems, lots of excitement and tension in the booth next door. If they think the listener's going to burst into tears, it makes great emotive radio and great content. There's nothing quite so real It doesn't matter what we say on as the presenters and the hosts on radio. It doesn't really matter what your advertisers say. The number one thing that your listeners will believe is when they hear another listener say something. So let's get good at doing that. And the only complaint we've ever had about the VX in the UK was the BBC complained that it actually sounded too good, and that people didn't believe that they were listeners. And this caused a problem because the BBC had a scandal about faking competitions and so on. So they kind of wanted us to make things sound a little bit more telephone-like because people couldn't tell who was the guest and who was the host in the studio and who was the caller calling in. And we kind of said, well, that's just the way things are going. Genuinely, people had to get culturally used to a different sound. That the callers no longer sounded quite as scratchy and quite as poor as they used to. So it's a great product, and Kirk paid me to say that, so I have to.
Hey, I remember putting the Olympics on the air in 80 or 82 or something like that. Whenever they were I think they were in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia. We had our first satellite link up on the radio from Sarajevo, and they were playing hockey. And we had listeners call the station and say, those people aren't really in Sarajevo. It sounds too good. And it did. It sounded fantastic. Wow. Hey, Chris Tarr, I mentioned you before the break here, and I wanted to get right back to you about your station that you're working at. You guys do a lot of social stuff.
We do. We do. We do a lot, and we're always looking at more. We have Tariq Moody, who's our digital director, is fantastic, brilliant kind of technical mind. And we're conveniently positioned so that our desks face each other. So all day long, we sit here and lob volleys back and forth about things that we're going to do. But we're still feeling our way around. We're a very small group of 15 employees at a nonprofit radio station. So, number one, that gives us a lot of flexibility, and it also gives us a lot of, we can be very nimble. When it comes to making a decision on social, it's he and I make that decision. So, we're open to be able to try a lot of new things. So, obviously we do a lot with Facebook and Twitter. We have, if you check us out on Facebook, we have quite an active Facebook page for a radio station. But now we're starting to work on our apps. We have the 88.9 app on Android and iPhone. We do these vignettes every hour. We do a community story 24 hours a day. It's about a 3-4 minute piece every hour, all day long. We podcast those through the application. We do weekly downloads. We have songs available for download every week that we give away. We have live performances that we do. We're starting to put that content on the web as well. And, we're starting to do things like, text messaging and instant messaging and things like that. So, we're slowly building that up. But, the difference between, for example, a large corporate type of presence and us is, we can try things on a whim and just see what works and what doesn't work. And we have an audience that really embraces that. We have an audience, very loyal audience, and also a group of people that are kind of in that, in that age range where this is their life. Interactivity is their life. So, we spend a lot of time figuring out how to engage those people. And, again, a lot of people don't even listen to us on the radio. They listen to us through the streaming app or those sorts of things. So, for example, one of the first things we did when I got there was, okay, how can we make our stream available to everybody on any platform they wanted? So that was one of the first things we did, was provide playlist files and use an encoding standard that anyone can use pretty much on any device, on any player they want. So, there's a lot of things like that where, we try to really get ahead of that curve. And some of these things that you're talking about earlier are things that we're working on next. So we do a lot of those things, and there's a lot more to come. Unfortunately, with two people, it's a little bit constrained by time, especially with a brand new building going up. But that's another thing that we've talked about, is everything we've put into this building, this new facility, is social. Coming to our facility, which is, by the way, going to be open to anybody, is going to be an interactive experience for the moment you walk in. There's a coffee shop on site. You sit down and sit at the coffee shop. You look down the hallway, there's the studio. You're going to hear the radio station. You're going to see the people on the air. You're going to be able to interact with them. So everything we did in the design of the building encourages interactivity, not only from people and listeners, but ourselves as well. All of the spaces that we've set up are interactive. And we have a hallway that's going to be nothing but what's called idea paint. So our hallways are going to be big whiteboards. We encourage people to come by and hang out with us and check out our facility. And, we try to extend it on the air as well. So there's the kind of the long and short of it.
I see the industry needing tools, and that's what I'm excited to hear Dan talk about, is the tools that are coming along. And I designing the first ones that really work well, I think it's very difficult. I think after people get used to Phone Box 4 being available and what it does, and interactions with Commotion and other companies doing kind of similar things, I think this is going to explode. But I think we, as an industry, have got to embrace this and move right along with it. Dan, I want to give you the last word. We're about out of time here. What do you have to wrap us up?
No, just that I think radio has an amazing future that we need to put share in its place. We make audio content, so remember the BBC's premise, not mine, of listen, watch, and share. Don't be timid. That's if one thing will destroy us, it will be that. But yes, we need to. I'm a tool maker, and you guys there at Telos and at Axia and so on are tool makers. We are. Trying to make the social studio, trying to redesign that space to factor the audience in, to factor this new kind of engagement in. And if we can create that environment where the listener feels engaged rather than excluded, when the talent feels empowered and informed rather than, quite often actually now the talent is the least knowledgeable person in the whole game. The listener knows far more about what's going on in the news and what the music they're playing than the presenter does. So empower and inform the presenters, engage and involve the listeners, and radio has an incredible future, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Cool. Chris Tobin, last words.
All I can say is don't give up hope. The content is still king, and the medium radio is the way to go. And just as Dan says, bring it all together, put the tools in the toolbox, and make it happen.
We're going to post, along with the show notes, the link to Dan's talk called Beyond Listeners. And Dan, seems like I heard that you may have had another talk that I haven't gotten a link to yet. If you have anything else you'd like me to share with our viewers and listeners, please email that off to me, and I'll get it as part of the show notes here in the next couple of days.
Okay, unfortunately, I haven't found that. I gave the talk at NAB, which was a US version of Beyond Listeners, featuring the Aflac Duck, who has 10 times as many followers as Z100 in New York, even though he can only say the word Aflac and he's trying to sell you insurance. So there's a lesson. There's a lesson to be learned there about social engagement and producing the right kind of interactive content. And actually did the same thing in South Africa, where again they have. Highveld, which is Highveld 94.7, the number one hit music station in Johannesburg, have 63,000 likes on Facebook. They did a promotion recently with Knorr Soup, where they gave away some Knorr Soup. Knorr Soup have a Facebook page called W for Dinner, What's for Dinner, which has 404,000 likes. So amazingly, they had this picture of the Highveld presenter carrying a box of dried soup, and the dried soup had 404,000 likes, the radio station 63,000. So, we have a lot of stuff to learn. There are people doing really exciting, really interesting things with social media. Unfortunately, as far as I know, the NAB pit talk was recorded, but I can't find it. You may have to pay for it being part of NAB, or it may be lost in the ether somewhere. But that may or may not be available through the NAB. The Johannesburg talk wasn't recorded, but the Beyond Listeners one, and of course Twerk, will live on long in the memory for people to rewind and say, what was he talking about? And if you follow me at Bionics Dan, then I rant about this occasionally on Twitter. And just please go back to your radio stations to start that conversation. This is not a product plug for us and Phonebox 4. This is a plea to the industry to start the conversation. If we can be part of that conversation, we'll come along and have that chat. We're mixing those groups of skills together. Go away and do it with or without us. But I'm excited to see what happens next.
Good deal. All right. Hey, thanks everybody for being here. You've been watching This Week in Radio Tech, episode 174 with Dan McQuillin of Broadcast Bionics. We're going to wrap it up quickly here. Our show brought to you by the folks at Telos and all the Telos talk show systems, making so much radio interactive with real callers and content and even people crying from time to time. That's right. Telos makes that possible. Hey, thanks a lot to Chris Tarr from Muckwonago, Wisconsin for being with us. Chris, where's the website that folks can participate in engineering conversations?
It is broadcastengineering.info, and as I was mentioning in the chat room, probably August we'll probably be able to do a couple of building tours of my new facility. And if you're interested in checking it out, we have pictures that are going up all the time at building.radiomilwaukee.com. queensmuseum.org, and you can see how the building's coming along.
Awesome. You put them on Facebook from time to time too, don't you?
I do. Yeah, if you're friends with me on Facebook, in fact, I put up new pictures today.
Yeah, I saw that. That's exciting. Building. You got some tools? Tool time. Chris Tarr.
Just grunt a few times.
Chris, thanks for being with us. Always a pleasure when you can join us. Chris Tobin as well from the studios in Queens, New York. Thanks for being with us, Chris Tobin.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a great time.
And let's see, you're not a social guy. Folks can't follow you anywhere, but the company that you lead around is musiccamusa.com, right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
All right.
I'm antisocial.
All right. And Andrew Zarian, who is very social. Andrew, thank you for switching and producing the show. Sure appreciate you. You're probably not going to show yourself. You know, you probably have already wiped off your makeup and muffed up your hair, haven't you?
No, I'm a mess. I can't show you.
Okay.
But
you're
horrifying.
a hot mess.
It's terrible.
A hot mess. Well, you guys have fun. Dan, thank you for joining us again. Have a good night, and we'll get the show posted in a couple of days, and I'll let everybody know where it is when that happens. Thanks to the chat room, too. Appreciate your comments here and there. Good conversation in the chat room this evening. And tell your friends. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. It's Twert Show on Twitter. We try to keep you updated on what's happening, remind you that the show's coming on and who our guest is, or if we're just talking amongst ourselves. All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another twert has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you like today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here. Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penelope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission. Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango. Signing off. Okay.